Thus says the Lord, I have seen you in the furnace, I have heard your cries in the night. And I tell you this, what was meant to consume you has only refined you. Listen closely, chosen one. This is not a word of comfort, this is a divine announcement. You did not walk through the storm by chance. You were not forgotten nor forsaken. Every tear you shed was counted in heaven. Every lie spoken against you was recorded in the book of remembrance. And today, the Lord himself speaks to explain what your pain has been preparing you for. The world looked at your fall and called it failure, but heaven called it transformation. While they saw collapse, God saw resurrection. While they believed you were drowning, he was carrying you through the river of fire to burn away what could not enter your next season. The storm was never sent to destroy you, it was sent to distinguish you. You have asked, in the quiet hours, Lord, why did they turn away? Why did I have to be alone? Why does it hurt so much? And heaven remained silent, not because God abandoned you, but because he was watching the examination of your soul. For only those who are chosen are tested so deeply, not to condemn them, but to confirm them. The silence of God was never his absence. It was his classroom. You were refined like iron in the fire, heated, struck, reshaped until nothing false remained. When others tried to measure your worth by what you lost, God was measuring your endurance by what you refused to surrender. Your faith, your integrity, your compassion. He said, You will not break, for I have placed my hand upon you. And while others mocked your weakness, heaven was applauding your obedience. Now is the turning of the tide, the divine exchange where heaven reverses the order of things. Those who mocked you will witness your rising. Those who dismissed you will see that grace has not expired. You no longer need to explain yourself, for God has already vindicated you. He chose you before they ever had a chance to define you. Every scheme they built against you will become the platform where his glory is revealed through you. You are not merely a survivor. You are a living witness of divine power. You did not just endure, you became proof that genuine faith cannot be burned. As the prophet Isaiah declared, When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. Isaiah 43:2. The same flame that was meant to destroy you has now become the light that reveals your calling. C.S. Lewis once wrote in The Problem of Pain, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. You have heard that shout, chosen one. Your suffering was never random, it was heaven's megaphone announcing your awakening. So stand tall. Do not tremble before the memory of the storm. Do not let the laughter of your enemies make you question your worth. The test is over. The verdict has been given. Heaven has declared, you passed. And now, as you listen to this message, let me ask you, do you feel it? That quiet stirring in your spirit, that confirmation deep inside. If these words resonate with your journey, write in the comments below, I have passed. Let heaven and earth see that the chosen ones are rising. One voice, one victory, under the hand of God. You went through the storm, yet it did not consume you. The wind tore through your plans, the waters rose against you, and voices said you would not make it. But here you stand still breathing, still chosen, still marked by grace. What they called your end was heaven's beginning. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. Isaiah 40:3-2. The storm was not a curse, but a cleansing. It stripped away what could not stay, revealing what was eternal within you. You thought God was silent, but he was teaching you to hear through the noise. You thought he was absent, but he was closer than your breath. The calm you prayed for never came, because the Lord was not calming the storm, he was calming you. He did not rescue you from it. He revealed himself in it. What the enemy meant for harm became your refining fire. The sea was allowed to rise, but only so far. The winds were fierce, but they could not destroy what heaven had sealed. The storm did not expose your weakness, it exposed his strength in you. You learned that faith is not proven in sunshine, but in thunder. Peace is not found in the absence of trouble, but in trusting through it. When everything broke apart, you discovered the rock beneath your feet. You lost many things, but not yourself. What the storm removed, you no longer needed. What it left is unshakable. You were not destroyed, you were transformed. The storm revealed who you truly are, unburned, unbroken, and unafraid. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4-8, 9. So lift your head, chosen one. The rain has passed, and the air is clear. You did not drown, you were delivered. The waves tried to silence you, but now your voice carries authority born of survival. You have walked through the fire and come forth as gold. The storm is over, but its lesson remains. You were never meant to drown, you were meant to rise. Every pain you faced was not a punishment, it was an examination of faith. Heaven does not test to destroy, heaven tests to reveal. Each heartbreak, each betrayal, each night of silence was a divine classroom where the Lord measured not your strength, but your trust. The testing of your faith produces perseverance. James 1-3. You wondered why the fire burned so long, why the prayers seemed unanswered, why the same storm returned again and again, but faith that is never tested remains shallow. God was not trying to hurt you, he was refining what he could use. He allowed the weight so that your roots would grow deeper. When everything you relied on was removed, you finally discovered what could never be taken: your faith in him. The trial was not proof that God had left you, it was proof that he believed you were ready. Just as gold is purified by heat, so are the chosen purified by hardship. Each tear that fell became a seed, and from that soil of sorrow, endurance was born. The moments that felt like failure were heaven's way of fortifying you. The silence of God was not rejection, it was promotion in progress. Remember Job, he lost everything that could be seen, so that heaven could reveal what could not be shaken. And when the test was over, the same God who permitted the loss restored double. That is the mystery of divine testing. What seems like breaking is actually building. What feels like subtraction is preparation for multiplication. You prayed for faith, and God sent situations that required it. You asked for strength, and he allowed trials that demanded it. You wanted to see his power, and he brought you to places where only his hand could save you. Through pain, you learned patience. Through loss, you found wisdom. Through silence, you learned to listen. Now you understand faith is not believing that God will do what you want. It is trusting that he will do what is right, and that trust has been proven in you. The trial was your teacher, the fire your tutor, the darkness your revelation. You have passed what others ran from. You stood when standing hurt. You believed when belief seemed foolish. And heaven has written the result across your story, approved by faith. And when the test grew heavier, when the trials pressed harder than before, they thought you would finally collapse beneath the weight. They misread the silence of heaven as your weakness, but they were wrong. For the same fire that was meant to destroy your faith became the furnace that strengthened it. They tried to break you, but God was refining you all along. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. Malachi ba. Every wound they inflicted, every scheme they built, every cruel word they released was permitted only by divine precision. The hammer fell, yes, but the hand that guided its rhythm was not theirs. It was the hand of the master craftsman. You were never their victim. You were his vessel. The heat they turned against you became holy fire in God's workshop. They saw you burning, but heaven saw you becoming. You were not being consumed, you were being cleansed. The fire burned off pride, fear, and every trace of the old you. The storm tested your faith, but the fire tested your purity. The pain revealed what applause had hidden, the core of who you are. For gold cannot be shaped without heat, and character cannot be formed without pressure. They mocked your pain, not realizing they were watching a resurrection in progress. They mistook breaking for ending, but in God's kingdom, breaking is birthing. The seed must split before life can emerge. The alabaster jar must shatter before its fragrance fills the room. You were not breaking down, you were breaking open. And though they celebrated your fall, heaven rejoiced at your formation. They measured your strength by what you lost. God measured it by what you endured. They saw ashes, but God saw an altar. He was building something eternal through the very moments that made you tremble. I have chosen you in the furnace of affliction. Isaiah 48:10. The Lord himself declares it. You were chosen not in comfort but in fire, not in applause, but in affliction. The flames did not erase your destiny, they revealed it. The pain did not destroy your calling, it purified it. Now you stand not as one who escaped the fire, but as one who carries its light. The same hands that tried to harm you became instruments in the hands of God. The heat that was meant to consume you became the light that exposes his glory in you. They wanted to break you, but heaven turned their cruelty into craftsmanship. You walked through the fire, and you came out shining like gold, untouched, untainted, and unbreakable. And after the fire could not break you, they sought another way. When their hands failed to crush you, they turned their tongues to corrupt you. They tried to poison your soul with envy, with bitterness, with deceit, hoping that if they could not destroy you from the outside, they might rot you from within. But what they forgot is this: a heart guarded by God cannot be infected by hate. You felt their words pierce like arrows. You saw how betrayal can disguise itself as friendship. They fed you lies, hoping you would swallow resentment. They offered you the cup of offense, waiting for you to drink it and become like them. But heaven intervened. Grace stood between your heart and their venom. Every time bitterness tried to take root, mercy whispered louder. Every time anger tried to rise, the Spirit reminded you of love. You could have fought back. You could have cursed them as they cursed you. But you chose silence, the holy kind that speaks louder than revenge. You chose forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because your peace was too precious to lose. You understood that hatred is a chain and forgiveness is the key. That is why your spirit remained uncorrupted. The Lord was watching. He saw the battle not of flesh but of spirit. And he said, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Romans 12:21. You obeyed, even when your heart ached. You chose love when the world demanded retaliation. You walked away from the trap, refusing to mirror the malice of those who envied your light. They called you naive. They mistook gentleness for weakness. But God knew what they did. Not softness is not fragility. It is divine strength under restraint. Christ himself hung on the cross, surrounded by mockery, yet he whispered, "Father, forgive them." That same Spirit lives in you. So when they hurled insults, you answered with patience. When they spread rumors, you responded with silence. When they wished for your fall, you prayed for their healing. And through it all, your soul stayed clean. Because purity is not the absence of wounds, it is the refusal to let wounds define you. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Matthew 5-8. You have seen him not in visions or thunder, but in the quiet strength that kept you kind. The poison never reached your spirit, because your heart was hidden in his. You did not fight as they fought. You overcame by staying true. Now heaven calls you refined not only by fire, but by mercy. Your purity is your protection, your forgiveness, your fortress. The same venom they used to destroy you has become the proof that you cannot be touched. The cup they prepared for your ruin has become your crown of endurance. They tried to poison your soul, but grace became your antidote. You remained gentle, yet unyielding, scarred, yet sanctified, wounded, yet whole. And when their poison could not touch you, heaven grew silent. You looked to the sky and heard nothing. You prayed, and no answer came. The same God who once spoke through thunder now seemed to hide behind the clouds. You asked, "Lord, where are you?" But his silence was not absence. It was instruction. Heaven's quietness is never neglect. It is divine training. God does not shout when he is teaching you to listen. In the stillness, he was sharpening your discernment, teaching you to recognize his voice beyond emotion, beyond circumstance. He was weaning you off dependency on signs and drawing you into the maturity of faith. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. You thought the silence meant punishment, but it was preparation. The teacher does not speak during the test. Heaven trusted your growth enough to stay quiet. What looked like distance was actually discipline, the kind that shapes leaders and prophets. When God hides, it is not to abandon, it is to deepen. He withdraws his voice to make you hunger for his presence, and in that hunger you discover his heart. Every unanswered prayer became a lesson. Every delayed promise became a mirror. You learned that worship without reward is still worship, and faith without feeling is still faith. You learned to walk by conviction, not confirmation. The silence stripped you of performance and drew you into purity. Elijah learned it too. The Lord was not in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. And you, like Elijah, found him in the quiet when the noise ceased, when the crowd disappeared, when your tears fell without witness. That whisper was your ordination. Do you remember those nights when you almost gave up? When you asked, "Is heaven deaf to my cry?" It wasn't deaf, it was discerning. Heaven listens with purpose. Every cry was recorded. Every silence was strategic. God was teaching you endurance that does not depend on evidence. Through silence, you discovered the power of stillness. You learned that obedience is louder than complaint. You found that waiting is not wasting when you are waiting on God. You stopped seeking signs and started seeking his face. And in that stillness, you were remade, not noisy, not restless, but stable, steadfast, and sound. Now you understand that silence was your sanctuary. It was the hidden classroom where heaven trained you for revelation. You came out of it different, your spirit tuned, your heart steady, your ears able to hear the faintest whisper of the Spirit. So when heaven was silent, you were not forgotten, you were being trained for command. God was teaching you to walk when there was no path, to trust when there was no voice, to see when there was no light. And now, because you endured the silence, you will speak with authority born from it. In quietness and trust shall be your strength. Isaiah 30:15. You learned to stop demanding answers and start embodying them. The silence that once wounded you has now become your wisdom. You no longer fear the quiet, you carry it. And everywhere you go, that peace speaks louder than words. Heaven's silence was never rejection. It was revelation disguised as stillness. When the silence finally lifted, you began to see what you could not. Before that, none of it was random. Every storm, every betrayal, every sleepless night had been woven together by divine design. What felt like chaos was actually choreography. Heaven had been writing a script that your pain could not yet read. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. You see now that the pieces fit. The rejection you thought would break you became the redirection that saved you. The delay that frustrated you became the doorway that positioned you. The loss that wounded you became the lesson that matured you. God wastes nothing, not tears, not trials, not time. Every experience, even the ones that seemed meaningless, was part of his architecture for your destiny. The enemy thought he was moving freely, but heaven was still holding the blueprint. Even his attacks were allowed only to the extent they served a higher purpose. Just as in Job's story, the adversary needed permission, and permission was never power. The hand of God remained sovereign over the details. He turned betrayal into training, suffering into strategy, pain into prophecy. While you were asking why, heaven was arranging the when. What felt like delay was actually alignment. God was synchronizing your steps with His timing. He was protecting you from premature promotion, from connections that would have corrupted your calling, from opportunities that looked holy but were traps in disguise. He was not withholding, He was weaving. You are living proof that divine order can rise from human chaos. The trial that felt accidental was intentional. The pain that seemed pointless was prophetic. You did not stumble into purpose. You were escorted by grace. The steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord. Psalm 37-23. Even when your footing slipped, His hand was guiding you. Now, when you look back, you realize how every wound had wisdom hidden inside it. Every valley carried a map. Every door that closed was heaven's way of steering you toward the one that mattered. The detours were direction. The disappointments were disguises. What you thought was punishment was preservation. They called it misfortune, but God called it molding. They saw disaster. Heaven saw design. You were never outside His plan. You were inside His process. Even in confusion, you were being constructed. And now, the architect reveals his intention. You were never lost, you were being led. You were never delayed, you were being developed. You were never abandoned, you were being aligned. The path may have twisted, but His purpose never changed. So rest, chosen one. Stop questioning the map that led you here. The road that seemed scattered was sacred. The pain that once made no sense now becomes your testimony. It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. Psalm 119-70. 1. What looked like broken pieces were blueprints all along. Nothing was wasted, not a moment, not a tear, not a test. Every trial was strategic. Every loss was intentional. Every silence was sacred. It was never random, it was the plan. And after you began to see that nothing was random, the Lord opened your eyes to the greatest mystery of all, that your collapse was not your ending. It was your beginning. You thought you were falling apart, but heaven was watching you being reborn. What looked like destruction was the delivery room of destiny. What felt like breaking was birthing. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it produces much fruit. John 12:24. There are seasons when God answers with increase, and there are seasons when He answers with breaking. In those moments, He allows everything familiar to crack open, not to punish you, but to release what has been hidden inside you. The seed cannot stay whole and still bear fruit. The womb must stretch, the shell must split, the old self must die so the true self can emerge. You prayed for transformation, and heaven answered with upheaval. You asked for purpose, and God sent pressure. You begged for clarity, and He allowed collapse, because sometimes the only way to rebuild is to first remove what cannot stand. The shaking was not your death, it was your delivery. You were being shaped for something larger than your comfort, something eternal. When you lost your footing, you thought God had stepped away. But the potter never leaves the clay in the middle of molding. Every twist of pain was His hand pressing gently, purposefully. The spinning was not chaos, it was creation. He was forming capacity for what He was about to pour into you. And though you cried, "Lord, I am breaking," He whispered back, "No, you are becoming." The people around you saw fragments. Heaven saw formation. They saw failure. Heaven saw foundation. The collapse was sacred. It emptied you of pride, of illusion, of the need to control. What you called weakness was actually surrender, and surrender is the birthplace of power. For when you came to the end of yourself, you discovered the beginning of Him. The psalmist wrote, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34-18. You were not crushed beyond repair. You were crushed into readiness. Every tear that fell was washing away the dust of the old life. Every sigh became labor for the new one. Now, as the dust settles, you realize you did not fall, you were planted. The darkness that surrounded you was not a grave. It was the soil of resurrection. Hidden, unseen, yet alive. Your roots began to reach downward so that your fruit could one day rise upward. What looked like burial was actually birth. And when you rise, and you will rise, you will not come forth the same. You will speak differently, love deeper, move slower, see clearer. You will no longer chase validation, for you have met your maker in the breaking. The pain that once defined you now becomes your proof. You were never destroyed, you were delivered into new life. Heaven's verdict over you is this: you were never falling apart. You were being reborn. And when you rose from the ashes of what you thought was your end, they mocked your progress. They said, "See, we've already won." They rejoiced over the small wounds they had caused, mistaking temporary victories for triumph. But heaven smiled, for it was never about the battles. They were too small for your purpose. You were chosen not for moments, but for the mission. They won the rounds, but you were destined to carry the crown. The Lord says, "The battle is not yours, but God's." 2 Chronicles 20:15. They fought to humiliate you, but heaven fought to vindicate you. They measured success in applause. You measured it in endurance. They celebrated noise, but you carried substance. They were busy winning arguments, while you were quietly gaining authority. For the war you fight is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in unseen places. Ephesians 6:12. They won battles of appearance, titles, platforms, attention, but you were securing eternal ground. Their victories were loud but fleeting. Yours were silent but eternal. Theirs came from pride, yours from purpose. For every scar they left, God was writing a strategy. For every blow you took, He was storing strength. You were not losing, you were learning divine warfare. They laughed when you retreated, not realizing that retreat in the kingdom is not surrender but strategy. Even Jesus withdrew to the mountain before the cross, not in defeat, but in preparation. Heaven always hides its generals before the final strike. God was positioning you while they were performing. He was teaching you how to fight, not with anger, but with anointing, not with weapons, but with wisdom. Remember, the cross looked like defeat too. The crowd cheered, thinking the war was over. But on the third day, heaven reversed the scoreboard. The resurrection proved that temporary loss is often divine leverage. That is your story too. Every battle you seemed to lose was secretly working toward a victory you could not yet see. You are not the wounded soldier they think you are. You are the hidden conqueror heaven has prepared. The war was never about who spoke louder, but who stood longer, and you, chosen one, stood. You endured betrayal, exhaustion, and isolation, yet you did not bow to bitterness. That endurance itself was your weapon. Now heaven declares, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Isaiah 54:17. The arrows they fired became the iron from which God forged your armor. The curses they spoke became the soil from which your blessings grew. The enemy exhausted his arsenal, yet you are still standing. They thought they had taken ground, but the truth is they only strengthened your resolve. You have learned that real victory is not in conquering others, but in mastering yourself. You have conquered fear, anger, and despair. And now, because you have overcome the inner war, no outer battle can defeat you. So let them celebrate their small wins, for you hold the greater prize. The final word belongs not to those who fought you, but to the God who called you. You do not just survive, you inherit. You do not just fight, you reign. For though they won a few battles, the entire war belongs to you. After the storm settled and the echo of their shallow triumphs faded, what remained upon you was not the trace of defeat, but the sacred imprint of endurance. Your scars are not symbols of shame. They are the signatures of heaven upon a life that refused to give up. Each one speaks silently yet powerfully, declaring, "You have overcome." They do not diminish you, they distinguish you. They are not reminders of pain, but monuments of grace. Every scar tells a story that even angels remember. That you stood in the fire and were not consumed, that you walked through betrayal and chose forgiveness, that you were struck but never surrendered. They are the visible handwriting of invisible strength. The world sees wounds, but heaven sees witnesses. Paul wrote, "I bear on my body the marks of the Lord Jesus." Galatians 6:17. Those marks were not the residue of failure. They were the proof of faithfulness. Likewise, your scars are the seal of divine ownership, the evidence that you belong to the one who brought you through. They testify that grace carried you where power could not. Your perspective has changed now. You no longer confuse pain with punishment. You understand that healing does not mean forgetting, it means transforming. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. By his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 50, 3-5. Even the risen Christ kept his scars, showing them to Thomas, John 20, 27. As proof that love conquers by surviving. You too need not hide yours. Let them shine, for they declare that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12-9. The enemy hoped his cruelty would leave stains upon your soul, but grace rewrote the outcome. A stain defiles, a scar defines. A stain locks you in the past. A scar points to the resurrection. What was meant to contaminate you has become your consecration. You are not defiled by what you endured, you are refined by it. Now, your scars have become your authority. They give weight to your words, depth to your compassion, and light to your leadership. You no longer hide your story, you guide others through it. Every scar becomes a lantern for those still walking through darkness. When new storms rise, your scars will remind you, we have walked this road before, and the Lord was faithful then. They will not pull you into sorrow, they will anchor you in strength, for they are not ashes of loss, but stars of remembrance, burning against the night to tell the world, redemption is real. And heaven declares over you, what was once meant to end you has now been transformed into evidence that cannot be silenced. Your scars are the testimony of victory. When your scars began to shine with glory, they could no longer ignore you. So they did what the fearful always do. They judged what they could not understand. They spoke as though they knew your story, yet they only knew your surface. They mistook your silence for guilt, your humility for weakness, your endurance for defeat. But while they sat in judgment, heaven was preparing revelation. For judgment belongs not to man but to God, and when he speaks, every hidden thing is brought to light. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Luke 8:17. They looked at your struggle and assumed they saw the full picture. They whispered, "If God were with you, why would this happen?" Not realizing that God was with you in it. Their words were arrows, but heaven turned them into instruments of exposure. For every lie they told about you revealed more about them than it did about you. They accused you to cover their own motives. They slandered you to distract from their own decay. The more they tried to bury you under rumor, the more truth unearthed their own foundations. You did not need to defend yourself. Your stillness became your testimony. Like Christ before his accusers, you stood in silence, not out of fear but authority. For God himself said, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay." Romans 12:19. And in his timing, he did. He allowed your name to be dragged, so he could cleanse it before all. He allowed their deceit to run its course so that, when it ended, it would unravel them, not you. And it happened quietly. One by one, their masks began to crack. The same tongues that rose against you turned on one another. The same hands that pointed fingers grew weary of holding their own guilt. What they had spoken in darkness came into the open, and what they had hidden was shouted from rooftops. Luke 12:3. Their judgment became their mirror, and in it they finally saw themselves. Meanwhile, you still standing, still faithful, became living proof that righteousness needs no defense. Your integrity outlasted their accusations. Your fruit silenced their gossip. Your endurance revealed what their words could not hide, that God had been with you all along. You learned then that when God allows false judgment, It is never to humiliate you, but to elevate you. He lets lies breathe only long enough to prove their own falseness. Every tongue that rose against you has been judged, not by your retaliation, but by his righteousness. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. They judged you based on what they saw. God vindicated you based on what he knew. They called you broken. Heaven called you chosen. They thought they were exposing your flaws, but God used their judgment to expose their own hearts. What they meant as mockery became your promotion. Now the tables have turned. You no longer stand in their court, they stand in God's, and the verdict has been rendered. You are free, you are clean, you are justified. The same mouths that condemned you will one day confess, surely the Lord was with them. For every false judgment that once wounded you, heaven now returns honor. You do not need revenge. Truth itself is your vindication. They judged you, but in the end, it was they who were exposed. When the voices of accusation faded and the fire of affliction cooled, you began to realize what it had all been for. The battles, the silence, the isolation. It was never about comfort. It was about capacity. Heaven was not grooming you for luxury, but for leadership. You were not chosen to sit in ease, but to stand in authority. For every wound became a lesson, every delay a discipline, every tear a training ground. The Lord did not raise you to be pampered by blessings, but to steward them. You were never meant to be a consumer of grace, but a carrier of it. Others may chase applause, but you were taught the weight of responsibility. While they desired crowns, you were being fitted for armor. Endure hardship as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. 2 Timothy 2-3. You were trained to fight, not for pleasure, but for purpose. You wondered why your path was so steep, why others seemed to rise faster while you were being broken longer. But what you called delay was discipline. God was not denying you, he was developing you. He could not place authority in immature hands. He could not entrust power to hearts, still craving validation. So he allowed you to serve before ruling, to obey before commanding, to carry burdens before giving orders. The wilderness was not punishment, it was preparation. In that solitude, God stripped away ambition until only assignment remained. He taught you how to hear his voice in the absence of applause, how to move when no one affirmed you, how to obey when nothing made sense. This is how commanders are forged, not in the comfort of palaces, but in the pressure of battlefields. Moses was trained in the desert before leading a nation. David was tested among sheep before ruling Israel. Even Christ himself labored in obscurity before revealing his glory. Likewise, you were hidden so you could be hardened, refined, not for display, but for deployment. God was shaping you into a vessel that could carry both power and purity without collapse. And now, the reason for your refinement becomes clear. Your hands were not trained to receive, they were trained to lead. Your heart was not enlarged for pleasure, it was enlarged for people. You were taught patience so that you could guide the impatient. You were taught endurance so that you could lift the weary. You were taught humility so that you could wield authority without pride. Do not envy those who live lightly. They were not called to carry what you carry. To be chosen is to be challenged. To command is to serve more deeply than anyone else. The throne you are approaching is not for self-exaltation, it is for service. You were trained to be a general in grace, not a collector of comfort. So when blessings begin to flow, hold them with trembling hands. Remember the fire that shaped you. Remember the silence that steadied you. Do not let abundance dull your obedience. For you were not trained for luxury, you were trained for leadership. To whom much is given, much will be required. Luke 12:48. You are not entering a season of ease, but a season of command, and heaven expects you to lead with the same faith that kept you alive in the storm. You were refined not to rest, but to reign, and to reign with righteousness. For the crown you bear is not made of gold, but of scars, and it was never meant for comfort, but for calling. There came a point when every voice went silent, when the crowd that once surrounded you drifted away, and even the ones you trusted could not understand you anymore. It felt as though heaven itself had stepped back and left you standing in the shadows. But that was not rejection, it was revelation. Loneliness was not your punishment, it was your initiation into intimacy with God. The chosen are always separated before they are sent. Isolation is heaven's classroom for greatness. Every prophet, every reformer, every vessel of purpose has passed through the desert of solitude. Moses was alone on the mountain before leading a nation. Elijah hid by the brook before calling down fire. Even Christ withdrew to the wilderness before his public ministry began. What looks like abandonment is often the moment heaven whispers, "Now I can teach you myself." In solitude, distractions die and discernment is born. When no one else is clapping, you learn to hear the applause of heaven. When no one answers, you learn that his presence is enough. When no one understands, you discover that his will is still clear. The silence that once frightened you becomes the space where your soul grows roots. For it is written, "He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Psalm 23:2-3. God hid you, not to deny you, but to define you. He removed the noise so you could hear his direction. He let certain relationships fade so your dependence would shift from people to purpose. Those who once walked with you were never meant to stand where you were going. The solitude was sacred. It marked the transition from being guided by others to being guided by him. You called it loneliness, but heaven called it consecration. The walls that felt like prisons were in fact temples, where God molded your inner strength. You learned the language of silence, the power of patience, the beauty of unseen growth. When no one called your name, God was writing it on his palm. When you thought you were forgotten, heaven was forming you. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the presence of preparation. It refines motives, realigns priorities, and reveals idols. In that sacred quiet, God showed you who truly matters, what truly lasts, and who you truly are. You stopped craving visibility because you found value in hiddenness. You stopped seeking company because you found communion. Now you understand. The isolation was initiation. It was heaven's way of setting you apart, not setting you aside. You were being separated so that when you speak, your words will carry weight. When you lead, your heart will carry humility. When you move, your steps will carry divine timing. So do not despise the solitude. It was never meant to harm you. It was the sacred gate to your calling. For the Lord himself says, "I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places." Isaiah 45:3. What others called abandonment, heaven calls anointing. You were not left alone, you were led apart. Loneliness was the first lesson of leadership. It was never rejection. It was your initiation. They saw you weary, trembling, and bent beneath the weight of trials. They saw your tears, but not your prayers. They saw your wounds, but not your worship. They saw your pauses, but never your perseverance. To their eyes, you looked fragile, a person on the edge of breaking. But what they could not see was the fire that never went out inside you, the flame that no storm could extinguish. They misread your stillness as surrender, your humility as defeat. Yet deep within, the Spirit of the living God was burning quietly, fiercely, shaping you into something eternal. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Isaiah 42:3. The world saw only smoke. Heaven saw the ember that would soon ignite nations. There were moments when you yourself doubted the flame. You felt cold, forgotten, drained. You whispered, "Lord, is there anything left in me?" And heaven answered not with thunder, but with breath. For the same God who breathed life into dust, breathed strength back into your soul. What they called exhaustion, heaven called endurance. They could not see how many times you stood up after falling, how often you praised through pain, how faithfully you kept loving after being wounded. They saw weakness, God saw worship. Every sigh became incense. Every tear became oil. Every moment you refused to curse became a declaration of faith louder than any sermon. You were never weak. You were being refined. The fire inside you is not human, it is holy. It does not burn with pride, but with purpose. It does not consume you, it consumes what holds you back. That's why, even in your lowest moments, something in you refused to die. That was not willpower. That was the Spirit of God sustaining His own. For our God is a consuming fire. Hebrews 12:29. Let them call you fragile. They do not understand that vessels must first be cracked before they can shine. Let them mistake your silence for surrender. They will soon realize it was the silence of focus, not failure. When they thought you were finished, you were gathering fire. When they thought you were fading, you were being fueled. The world honors strength that roars, but heaven honors strength that endures. The lion and the lamb both carry power, but yours is the quiet kind, the kind that rebuilds cities and revives hearts. You don't need to prove the fire, just protect it. You don't need to explain your survival. Your glow will do it for you. The same hands that tried to crush your spirit unknowingly fanned the flame. Their rejection became oxygen. Their doubt became kindling. Their cruelty became fuel. And now, what was once flickering has become a furnace. You are not merely surviving, you are blazing. So do not despise your weakness. It was the veil that hid your strength. They saw fragility, but heaven saw fire. They saw a reed. God saw a torch. And now the world will see too that what they called weakness was actually worship in disguise, and the flame within you was never meant to go out. For you carry not your own fire, but His, and that fire cannot be extinguished. After every battle was fought, every storm endured, every silence survived, heaven asked you one last question, not about power, not about faith, not about endurance. The question was love. For in the end, all trials, all lessons, all refining flames come down to this. Did you still love? When others betrayed you, did you still forgive? When prayers went unanswered, did you still trust? When you stood alone, did your heart remain tender? That is the question every chosen one must answer. And you did not with your lips, but with your life. For when everything around you hardened, you kept a heart that could still feel. When the world demanded vengeance, you chose mercy. When bitterness called your name, you remained kind. That is victory, not in the strength of the hand, but in the purity of the heart. The Lord tested you in many ways, but the truest test was love. If I have faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. 1 Corinthians 13:2. It was never about how loudly you could speak truth, but how gently you could hold it. It was never about how long you could stand in fire, but whether you could still bless the ones who lit it, and you did. You loved when it was inconvenient. You forgave when it was undeserved. You prayed for those who wounded you. You carried compassion where others carried complaint. That is what makes you chosen, not your strength, not your wisdom, but your capacity to love when it costs the most. Heaven watched as you bled and still blessed. Angels recorded every moment you chose kindness over pride, mercy over defense. You loved, not because they were worthy, but because He loved you first. 1 John 4:19. That is the highest form of obedience, the reflection of divine love in a human heart. And now you understand why the road was so hard. God was teaching you not how to win, but how to love like Him. To love without expecting return. To love without needing recognition. To love even when love is rejected. That is the final mastery of the chosen to wield love as a weapon against darkness itself. Your scars became proof of that love. Each one says, I was hurt, but I did not hate. I was wronged, but I still forgave. Those are not wounds. They are declarations. You have answered the final question with a resounding yes, not through words, but through the endurance of a heart that refused to close. So now heaven declares, you have passed the highest test. You have proven that true victory is not conquering others, but conquering yourself. You have shown that holiness is not perfection, but love that perseveres. And because you loved through the unlovable, heaven calls you friend, not servant. For in the end, faith will move mountains, hope will light the way, but only love will last forever. 1 Corinthians 13:13. And you, chosen one, you have loved well. You have answered the final question, and your answer was your heart. There was a time when you begged heaven for meaning, when you cried out for reasons, for signs, for understanding. You asked, Lord, why this pain? Why this silence? Why me? But now, after walking through the fire and surviving the flood, you no longer ask those questions. Not because you've grown numb, but because you've awakened. You have become what you once sought. You no longer chase the answer, you are the answer. For every trial, every scar, every tear has shaped you into living truth. You are the evidence that faith still works, that grace still restores, that love still wins. When people look at you, they see what endurance looks like in flesh and blood. They see what divine strength looks like when wrapped in human weakness. They see the word made visible through a life that refused to give up. You are a letter from Christ, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on human hearts. 2 Corinthians 3:3. You once asked for miracles, but now you understand you are one. You were not rescued from the storm, you were transformed through it. You were not spared from breaking, you were shaped by it. The very things that once made you question God have become the proof of His presence. Every moment that almost ended you became the moment that remade you. Now you walk differently. You no longer speak as one seeking validation, but as one carrying revelation. You no longer chase promises, you embody them. The peace you once prayed for now flows through your voice. The wisdom you once searched for now lives in your silence. You no longer look to the heavens asking, why? You look within and realize heaven has already answered through you. Your story has become a sermon. Your endurance has become a prophecy. Your very existence is the declaration that God is still faithful, that redemption is real, that darkness can never defeat light. You are not merely the student of the journey. You are the message it produced. So stand tall, chosen one. The search is over. The questioning heart has found its home. You have walked through every test, passed through every fire, and come forth not just as a believer, but as a revelation. For those who will come after you, your life will be the answer they've been praying for. When they doubt, they will see you and believe again. When they despair, they will hear your story and rise. When they ask, does God still move? Your presence will whisper, yes. You are no longer waiting for the light. You are the light. You are no longer searching for the word. You are the word made manifest through endurance and grace. You are no longer asking for proof. You are the proof. The fire did not destroy you, it defined you. The silence did not erase you, it refined you. The pain did not end you, it anointed you. And now heaven declares, you are not looking for the answer anymore, because you have become the answer.